Let's take a breath together. Thank you all for your patience. We love technology and we don't sometimes. We just breathe in the higher sacred intelligence, the sacred technology. Let's invite in the sacred technology, who we be on this planet. So welcome to this session 2 of our live stream from the One Planet Peace Forum. We have the pleasure and delight here to bring these panelists to us to muse on a question. And I'm really looking forward to this one because we've kind of set the stage for this all day today. And I'm going to invite each of our panelists to give a little opening statement on this question. And then we'll see where the conversation goes again, and we'll try to weave that in. So again, thank you all. Let me breathe into the beautiful One Planet Peace Forum and the intention for our deeper discovery here. So the question for our panel today is, how are contemplative and activist roles complementary in peace building? And almost in every conference we go to and attend and Zoom rooms we're in, we are always talking about the beers and the doers, the contemplative and the action, the implicate and explicate order of our universe. So this is an important topic for us all to muse into. And if you're getting hits in our audience, please record them. Like if something's inspiring you, please write that down, don't lose it, so that we can harvest the magic that comes through when we're all together and our collective intelligence to really listen deeply to who we are as a species as we navigate without it being either or and both anymore. But what is that thing that is contemplative action? That doesn't have to be an either or. So the question, I have 5 panelists with us here. For those that don't know them yet, I am going to introduce them real briefly to you now, and then we'll be passing the mic on. Our first is Swami Tyagananda, and he is the head of the Vedanta Society of Boston. Welcome. Next, we have Tim DeChristopher, environmental justice activist. And we have Sherri Mitchell, Indigenous rights activist and author of Sacred Instructions. And we have Robert Shutterly, portrait artist, author, and activist. And then finally, we have Philip Goldberg. And Philip is the interfaith minister and author of American Veda. So welcome to this program, and we're going to start with you, Swami.
Thank you. So connecting contemplative life with an activist life is another way of putting that would be connecting our inner life with our outer life. So connecting being with doing. One way to deal with this question would be from the point of view of trying to understand what an authentic life would be. And one way of understanding authenticity would be that whatever I say, whatever I do, the way I relate with myself and the people around me and the work I do is an expression of who I am. So that would be one way of connecting the inner me with the outer me. And one thing, especially in context of bringing peace and working for a common good, would be that I can only bring peace if there is peace in my heart. I can only give what I have. And it's not only just kind of summoning peace from somewhere. I have to be peace myself. And then I don't have to actually do anything to bring peace, because if I become peace myself, then whatever I say, whatever I do, will automatically become an expression which will bring peace. And of course, if I do it consciously, I can do it even in a better way. So if I want to spread love, there has to be love in my heart. We don't have to, that is in the tradition I come from, they make a distinction between being and becoming. And so sometimes we can say, oh, we must become loving, we must become unselfish. And what they say is that becoming loving is a problem, because if we become something, we can also unbecome that at some point. Because the word become sometimes is used in the sense of becoming something different from who I am now. And so that way of thinking is, my true nature is love. And if that, the true intrinsic love in my heart is not manifesting outside now, that means there is some obstacle preventing that love from coming out. And all I need to do is to remove that obstacle. And the love which comes is not, because when we try to become loving, we already have so many masks over our personality. So becoming loving would mean I then put on one more mask of being a very loving person, which is not helpful. And another way, and in my opinion, a better way would be to say that my true nature is loving. And all that I need to do is to remove all hatred and biases and prejudices from my heart. And if I do that, my inherent love will automatically come out. I don't have to become unselfish. I just have to stop being selfish. And then unselfishness, which is my true nature, will come out. Similarly, when I remove all hatred, love will come out. I remove all stress and conflict, my inner conflicts that I have. If I remove them, then peace, which is my true nature, will automatically come out. So I think one way of connecting my contemplative life with an activistic life would be becoming, again, not in the sense I mentioned before, actually being what we want to be. So I think authenticity might be helpful in connecting the contemplative me with the activistic me.
Yeah. Yeah, sure. Well, we don't get surrounded and engulfed by our own snakes up here. But I want to say just something briefly about the subject that we're supposed to be talking about, and then something else. I want to comment on the last session right before this. First of all, I find the relationship between the contemplative and the activist in the practice that I do. I mean, for me to paint a portrait has to be incredibly contemplative. I mean, if I'm not fully present the full time that I'm doing that, mistakes get made. It doesn't look like the person. It's not artistic. It doesn't encourage anybody to really understand the integrity of, or feel the integrity of the person I'm painting. It has to be a contemplative act. However, the whole process of doing that prepares me then to go out and either use these in teaching or in, doing some kind of an activist event, a civil disobedience, or whatever it is that I'm going to be doing in the spirit of the people I paint, which is really important to me, to not just paint them, but to honor them and be inspired by them to do the very things or similar things, not often to the same level, but similar things. I mean, to me, there's no point in presenting people like this as models of courageous citizenship unless I'm willing to do the things themselves that need to be done. or at least I think need to be done. But what I want to say about the previous session was that I was watching that, and I hope I don't upset anybody saying this, but when I was watching that, I was thinking, well, if you were in the hood, say, if you were in a boardroom at Lockheed Martin, or the war room at the Pentagon, or a lot of other places in this country, say right at the JFK school, you're in an academic room with a bunch of people who are in the revolving doors between the Pentagon, the war industry, the politicians, all that stuff. What would you think about that? I would have thought that they would be laughing at that conversation. I mean, I hate to say it that way, or snickering. This was at a level up here, or kids in the hood. What's the relationship between that kind of talking at that spiritual level about peacemaking that has to do with the either reality of real war making, which is the economy of this country, or what goes on in the day-to-day life in the violent streets of this country? How those people should be invited to be here and have these conversations with all of us about what it's like to live in violence all the time, or to want to create violence all the time, because they think it's either good for, the way you have to, survive, or the way you have to survive by making lots of money. And they want all that violence to go on. I mean, when we talk about peacemaking at a kind of airy level that doesn't feel at all grounded in what is the nitty-gritty of violence in the world, it upsets me. Somehow we've got to be grappling with what is really going on there. That there are the major forces in this country do not want peace. They are living off violence, and they are giving half of the money they make right back to our Congress so that that doesn't change. And I think that, to me, I was just upset thinking that, that somehow we're evolving to this place where, which is a really nice thought, and I hope it's true, where somehow this other way of living that is actually making the reality of our lives and our inner cities and all these places be what they are today is going to go away. It ain't, We've got to enlarge this discussion a whole lot and be talking about this at a different level and with different people to make it seem real. That's my contemplation.
Okay.
Thank you, Rob. One of the little theories that I've had for myself for a number of years that I just kind of keep in my head to help me make sense of things is that across all the different types and labels of religion, there are basically four fundamental varieties of spirituality. And they're not necessarily exclusive. There's probably a lot of overlap for people. But those four varieties of spirituality for me are mysticism, fundamentalism, activism, and narcissism. And I often see those paired in my view of things, where obviously when we look around the world, the realities that we see is that the ascendant themes or the ascendant styles of spirituality are fundamentalism and narcissism. And like I said, those transcend all those labels. There are Christian fundamentalists and Islamic fundamentalists and atheist fundamentalists and New Age fundamentalists that are all linked by the fundamental approach of a certainty that they have the one right answer, they have the one truth, and that the world must be unified around their one truth. And we see how dangerous that is, and certainly fundamentalism is holding a lot of the power in the world. But I think narcissism is actually the most common spirituality in our modern world, rooted in that worship of the self that is simply focused on the ego. And while it's far more common than fundamentalists, it's easily co-opted by fundamentalists because it's so easy. It's so easy to entice the ego into whatever means you want to motivate someone into. And so those practicing narcissism are so easily swept along by fundamentalists for their various battles for world unification. But then I also see the mysticism and activism deeply linked as well, because the mysticism is that spirituality that is based on a relationship with the transcendental, with that beyond ourselves, that which we can't quite clearly see. And that to me is really what the contemplative life is about. And the activism is about trying to improve the condition of the lives of those around us and those that we share the world with. And one of the ways that I often describe the link between those two things, or what we might call the inner work and the outer work, is like riding a bicycle. And that inner work of understanding our relationship to that beyond us is like getting the balance on our bicycle. And that activism work of trying to affect some positive change in the world is like pedaling the bicycle. And a lot of people argue about like which should come first. You know, do we have to fix ourselves first, or do we have to fix the world first? And when I think about that idea of the bicycle, that trying to do that inner work first is like trying to get the balance perfect on your bike before you ever start pedaling. And you know, if you can imagine doing that, you know that you'll always be adjusting your balance, that you'll never go anywhere because you can always be fine-tuning your balance on that bike. But then by the flip side of that, if you just pedal and don't worry about balance and just charge ahead, you're going to crash pretty soon. You're not going to make it very far. You're likely to hurt yourself and probably others. But when you get a little bit of balance, when you try to get some balance, but you also start to try pedaling at the same time, that forward momentum helps us to sustain the balance, and the balance sustains the forward momentum, and they're mutually reinforcing in that way. And that to me is my understanding of the contemplative and the activist life. And I've seen that as an activist, where activist communities can be lacking that contemplative life and end up at each other's throats, end up not being able to get along and to cooperate, and maybe get lost in their own egos and end up crashing. And I've also seen it where they get stuck in that inner work of stepping back and back and back from action because they think, oh, we've got to work on ourselves first. We've got to work on our interpersonal stuff, and get lost in that endless balancing act. But it's only when they trust that they can improve that balance as they move forward and keep working on that. And as far as I can understand what that contemplative life might offer, that mysticism might offer to the activism, which is why it's able to sustain it in the only activist movements that I think have that lasting power, is that in that relationship with the transcendental, in that exploration of how we are connected to something so much bigger than ourselves, we find that spark of divinity that is within us, that piece of the one divine, the one great love that is in us, and find that divine power that we have, which I can only really understand as the power of grace, the power of offering that grace to each other and to the world around us, which is kind of the only genuine creative act that we can do. Because in the absence of that grace, we are just stuck in this cycle of reacting to all these things that have come before us, to all the stimulus that have come before us. And, perhaps most of the activism that we do would better be described as reactivism, because we're just stuck in this cycle of reacting. And it's only out of that position of grace, of forgiving what has come before, that we can really create what we want to see and move forward in that way. And those are just my own views that have helped sustain me on that bicycle for a little while. Thanks.
We have new people in the room with us virtually, so I want to introduce myself in my own traditional way. Kwe Pasidawin. Hello, everyone. And Dili we see one hamugwasid na geo banawabskewi. Basilda del Nabama Gawasus no banawabskewi, Nakakakabus Niltibayek. And to our new friends at Wanude to Babanakiek. My name and my language is one hamugwasid. I am from the Penobscot Nation. My family is Bear Clan from the Penobscot Nation and Crow Clan from the Passamaquoddy tribe at Zibayik. And I would like to welcome our friends from away to Wabanaki territory. And also to thank you, Swami, for your comments, Rob, Tim, for what you've offered so far, and Phil for what you will be offering in a moment. And I think that there's three or four things that I want to say. The first thing that I want to say is, I just really admire Rob's courage to come forward and say, this habit that we have of talking well beyond the capacity of those who are suffering the greatest impacts of the lack of peace in our world is very self-indulgent. And that when we can't bring ourselves down to the level of those who are suffering most deeply, we're actually avoiding the work that we're proclaiming to be the highest work of our lives. And so how do we do that? How do we bring ourselves into that space of being that witness to the truth of suffering that exists around us in a way that gives us actual capacity to be able to do something about it? And so there's something that I talk about in Sacred Instructions where I'm having an experience in a contemplative practice, but we don't say practice, in living our traditional way of life, where I was working on the development of a specific skill for myself that related to my spiritual way of life. And I had this moment where I was watching this ant crawl across a piece of grass, and I have been working really hard to learn to see the energy of living beings. And I was looking softly at this ant, and was also just being open and present. Didn't have any attachment, any real focused thought on it. And all of a sudden, the ant's little body lit up. And then the blade of grass lit up. And then all the blades of grass lit up. And I kind of swept my eyes across the field. I was sitting, leaning against a tree in my backyard, and there's a field and then forest on the other side, and the whole field lit up. The trees on the other side lit up. The birds that were flying through lit up. And I was sitting there very still, very carefully, trying not to shift anything so that I didn't lose this new sight that I had. And all of a sudden I noticed that this circle of light, or this ring of light, or outline of light, it wasn't a circle, it wasn't a ring, it was an outline of light on all of these living relatives that were sitting there with me, the trees and the grass and the ant and the birds, was moving in unison. And it was rising and it was falling simultaneously. And I just had this moment of sinking into that rhythm and allowing myself to breathe with that light. And as I did so, the firm boundaries of this being, right, that I so identified with my whole life disappeared. And I was having this literal, tangible experience of this theoretical notion of oneness that I had been raised with as an Indigenous woman. And having that recognition that I was part of one living being, sharing this one breath, having all of these individualized, simultaneous experiences of myself in multiple forms all at once, shattered what I thought I knew about my individual self. And when I had that realization, I started thinking about, if I'm really part of one living being, having individualized, simultaneous experiences of myself in multiple forms, then how do I want to meet myself on the path? How do I meet the fundamentalist or the narcissist? How do I meet the fascist? How do I meet someone who's being very destructive to people that I love, if I truly believe that they are me and I am them? And I had to do this trick with my mind where I said, okay, if that's really true, then I'm going to treat this person who's so far beyond the knowledge of this truth of our oneness as somebody who's suffering from severe dementia and is somebody that I love dearly, who has lost their way and can't remember who they are. And they don't remember who I am. And if somebody that I loved deeply was out wandering around lost with severe dementia, how would I want them to be brought home? Would I want them to be treated with violence and anger and hostility, or would I want them to be lovingly guided back home? This is something that I continue to work on every single day of my life, and I fail miserably at often. But if we truly believe in this concept of oneness, not sameness, but oneness, of our individuation being this multiplicity of experiences that we're having of our one living self, then we have to really think about how we meet one another. And we have to really think about the fact that our individualized way of being serves purpose in our education and our evolution of our consciousness. And we have to stop being extractive of one another. And so, as an Indigenous woman, one of the things that I have seen my whole life, is extraction from our ways of being. So American Indian people didn't have religious freedom until 1978. By the end of that year, white people were selling our ceremonies. So they had taken everything. We finally get freedom to be ourselves and to live our spiritual way of life, and it becomes a commodity. And so how do we receive from one another without taking is another thing that we need to think about, because there's so much for us to learn. But how do we approach that learning as something that's not a commodity? That's a challenge for us that we have to really think about. So now getting to Julie's question, I'm really thinking about how that contemplative and active aspects of our being are connected. We have words in our language that I wrote about in Sacred Instructions. Two of these things I wrote about in Sacred Instructions, where one of them is Walikamau, which is this internal state of being And in our traditional peacekeeping practices, recognition that it's a lack of harmony that causes people to cause harm, and that it's a return to harmony that's going to bring wholeness back to their being and prevent them from continuing to cause harm in the future, is part of our restorative justice systems. And so this concept of recognizing that there's some kind of distortion in their sense of internal balance. But the sense of internal balance, Wulikamawu, is it's our inner state of being. And then we have Kachei, which is our outer state of being in harmony with the external world. And between those two things is our sacred way of life, Skajinawe Bamasawagan. And at the heart of that way of life is the Medewalan practices, or way of life, which is our sacred spiritual medicine paths. And what we know is that the balancing of this inner state of harmony with this outer world is found in the Medewalan way of life, which is exploring the space in between. So we're exploring the space in between the inner and the outer. And there's all of these possibilities that exist in that space in between. And so a lot of people talk about, a lot of different faith traditions have different words for these things. In some of our traditions, a translation for a person who would be considered what many would call a medicine person, somebody who works with spiritual energies. That translation of the word for that person in our language is the hollow man. So the one who opens themselves to allow for that spirit to move through them. There's a hollow reed in other religious traditions. And so that Medewalan is a recognition of that space in between where all possibilities exist. And so I think that for me, that contemplative and active is found in the life way that corresponds to those understandings. It's about recognizing that this inner state of being that I have has to be balanced with the outer world in which I live. And the active practice of that is recognizing all of the possibilities that exist between here and there. And being able to be curious and to have this state of continuous wonder, but also immense gratitude for what emerges from within that space in between. And, I think that we as a species fall down quite frequently in our attempts to harmonize our lives with one another, that external piece of being connected. We fail to see ourselves in the other. Sometimes we fail to see ourselves in the mirror. And so, as we're moving through this process of trying to find this pathway between inner and outer, we have to realize that it's just an illusion of our minds. It's like seeing that little ant's body light up was just a subtle shifting of my vision. It's not that it just happened in that moment. It's that I had not been looking in a way that allowed me to see. And so how can we shift our vision? What's a subtle shift that we can make to our vision that allows us to see in a different way that lights things up for us? So I guess that's my opening. So thank you.
The good thing about speaking last is you get to respond to what other people said. The downside is they've already said what I wanted to say, so I'll try to say something different. And I'm looking forward, Tim, with your permission, to borrowing your bicycle analogy in my future talks. Thank you very much. I liked it. And it's very real, because Tim's analogy captures in a very useful image what I always saw as the relationship between the inner and the outer, and the contemplative and the activist. And if you look at the spiritual traditions, they all the ones that have retained a contemplative or mystical hold on spiritual practice, where that's retained, there's also what in Swami's tradition would be called karma yoga. The bhaktas, the devotional types, the jnanis, the mentally oriented practitioners, the Raj yogis, the meditative ones, they're all called upon to do some service, to be karma yogis. And it's not just because, well, there's, in my understanding, there's several reasons for that. One is it puts into practice, into real life, the benefits gained from the inner dimension of spiritual practice. It makes it real. It makes it, it grounds it in the human elements of what we are. And stabilizes it that way. So there's spiritual value in doing service, in working selflessly, whether it's just helping to feed the people in your neighborhood or sweeping the floor in the ashram or taking on the Pentagon or getting into politics or whatever the person is called to do in accord with their own nature and the needs of the time. So there's practical value in both the contemplative side and the activist side, and they feed one another if they're done well and if they're done properly. A deep contemplative life, one that takes time every day for sadhana, for spiritual practice. It doesn't mean your contemplative life doesn't mean you go off into a cave and become a monastic. I mean, there's a place for that, of course, for some people. But for most of us, it simply means taking some time and on a regular basis to turn within and awaken to the depths of what we truly are. And you've heard examples of those kinds of unitive spiritual experiences that the mystics all know is at the core of what we are, of our being. If you look at the literature and if you look at the scientific research that's been done on meditative and contemplative practices over the last 40, 50 years, and there's a tremendous body of work now, this notion that the spiritual is impractical and otherworldly disappears because, the British scholar Evelyn Underhill wrote a book over 100 years ago called Practical Mysticism. And ever since I wrote it, I said, okay, I'm a practical mystic. That's the label I'll accept. And it means that there's real value in having a contemplative practice. It makes your life better. But it also makes you, if it's deep enough and consistent enough, a better person than you might otherwise have been. It doesn't make you a perfect person. No one's arguing that, the people who have a contemplative life are somehow saints. I'm sad to say it doesn't necessarily work that way. They need prodding to do right in the world. They need to be educated and taught ethics. So all these things matter. But the odds are in their favor of improvement in the direction we'd all like human beings to go. So do people who have a deep contemplative practice become more loving, more compassionate, more capable of empathy, less greedy, less self-centered, more likely to say, well, I have enough, I can share. I know contentment comes from within me, and I don't have to go chasing after acquisitions. I can devote some time to helping other people. I can do some good in the world. That's much more likely to come about because a good, deep contemplative practice is transformation. It changes the brain. It changes the emotional life. So to me, the bicycle analogy I love. The analogy I used to hear is in order to shoot an arrow accurately and at a target, you first pull it back. And the pulling back is the contemplative practice part of it. And then the letting go and the springing into life with skill and dedication and concern and discernment, that if engaged properly and harnessed properly can lead to a more successful activist. An activist who's more likely to make good decisions, kind decisions, generous decisions. So to me, it's all very practical. I'm just going to, I was reminded of a story that I was told the last time I was in India. There was some big political thing going on in the local area, and people were very upset, and politicians and the leaders, everybody was arguing. And they brought in a Swami, not to adjudicate, but to please tell us the truth here. What should we do? And they expected a really esoteric answer, some deep, spiritual revelation. And he had a one-word answer, and the answer was vote. So there's a thing going on, and then, okay, I'm a spiritual leader, but I'm a citizen. Find out what you need to know, make good choices, and vote. And sometimes it comes down to knowing the right thing to do, but you're more likely to know the right thing to do if you have that kind of connection to the divine within you, because it makes us better in many ways. But it's not enough.
It's not enough. Thank you. Wow. How to bring this to closure. I really want a presence. Thank you for your courage. And I believe you just literally used an example with that I want to borrow. Sherri, is that one of dementia. When you were sharing that story of the dementia, it touches the heart. That's the compassion piece. That's the compassion piece. So with Rob's query, I think it's really important for us to presence this. Like, how do we bring the truth of existential reality when we've all been under the spell of amnesia as humanity, and teaching our children and designing our social systems around a false reality that's led to where we're at and what we're talking about here. So how do we bring it into the practical of meeting those in pain, meeting the victims, really telling the truth? How do we bring something so big that many people can't comprehend, perhaps, can't comprehend, and those that are waking to it? How many in here has lit up an ant before on a blade of grass? we have those who really can engage and embody in this intimacy with this multidimensional reality, and those who aren't there. So how do we bridge that to heal the suffering, to heal the separation? So to wrap all this, it's impossible, but I'm going to give you each 1 minute so we can be respectful of schedules that are here. And I just, whatever's on your heart to close, but I'm wondering, how do we bring raw passion to bring this really big concept that we used to say is woo-woo, but it's not woo-woo anymore, right? And people would go, oh yeah, that woo-woo stuff. It's not woo-woo, it's science. And we're getting it on many different dimensions and levels of cognitive ability now. So how do we bring it down to really have compassion for the dementia and those who are suffering in the streets? So I really appreciate that, and really want to presence it, and we can continue that part into tomorrow and really look at how do we bridge that. And I'm going to give you all 1 minute to just kind of wrap whatever's on your heart right in this moment on this topic.
The great composer Mozart is reported to have said that the real music is not in the notes, but in the pause between the notes. And I do not believe that, although what some of us was mentioning, the ideas that are being expressed here might seem very transcendental, very high, and our present experience of common average life might seem way far from that. I don't think it's much of a gap. I just think that our lives have become too mechanical. Our lives have become too superficial. Most of the things that we do and say, we just take them for granted. So when we keep speaking about the fast-paced life, but occasion like this great retreat we are having this weekend, even when we go back to our homes and resume our duties, we might be able to, it might be helpful to find some time to pause and learn to look at things deeply. And if we look at things deeply, then our superficial understanding might go. We might notice things we may not have noticed before. We might be able to hear things we may not have heard before. So I think the more we learn to slow down, pause, look deeply, what at present might seem to be some very high abstract truths might seem to be just very obvious to our eyes. So that would be my 1 minute thing, just to slow down, pause, be mindful. Thank you.
Sure. Okay. First, I want to thank Bob and Julie and whoever else has brought us together here with all of you, and to be able to sit here with Swami, Tim, Sherri, and Phil and have this discussion. I'm just really grateful for that. I've learned a ton myself, just other ways of thinking and seeing that I did not have. And I just want to tell a little story, which I think is, I mean, you all know this story, but maybe not have thought about it in the way that I hadn't thought about it. And that is, which to me is very much about contemplation and action. I mean, I don't know how recently you've read The Wizard of Oz, and we all know the movie, but it's important to actually read the book. And it's just enough different that it can be very surprising. What happens at the beginning of it, you all know there's a tornado and Dorothy gets swept away with her dog Toto. What we don't often pay attention to, and I don't remember any emphasis on this in the movie, but in the book, what's happening is there's the threat of the tornado. Auntie Em and Uncle Henry have run to the storm shelter, and they've yelled to Dorothy to come down immediately. And meanwhile, they've gone down there, and she's lost Toto. And so she's running around the house with the storm coming, looking for her dog. And She doesn't find the dog in time, and she and Toto get swept away. What's important about that is the trigger for the story. The trigger is her act of radical compassion for her dog, and that Auntie M and Uncle Henry did not come back up out of the storm shelter to rescue her when it was, imminent that she was going to be swept away. They didn't have that radical compassion. She did. And it seemed to me that what we're talking about here, in that moment, all the contemplative practice of loving her dog coalesced at this moment where it was suddenly very risky to have that love. And she, instead of running away from it, she embraced it and risked losing, herself and her dog to save her dog. That radical compassion, I think, is what we want as the fruit of this contemplative moment. Being ready when the time comes to act with that compassion. She then is able to go to this mystical place, which is actually a very real place, and teach adults how to be smart, how to have courage, and have brains. Or what was the other thing? Brains, heart. Yeah, a heart. She's teaching adults how to do those things because of her act of radical compassion. She has stepped across a line where her ability to love fully has, carried her into another world where she can actually teach those things. Those three characters who needed to be taught had those characteristics all the time. They just needed them awakened in themselves. And it took a girl with a dog to do it because she had done that thing. And I think that's kind of what we're talking about here is, having prepared yourself through that real loving to be able to take those kinds of risks in action.
I've been lucky enough to hear Sherri tell that story about the ant on the blade of grass several times, and have read that story in her book, and get a little something new out of it every time. But hearing it in the context of this conversation today made me think of it in a new way about having the depth of contemplation to see that ant light up, and then to be able to contemplate that question of how can I meet myself on the road? When I see myself on the road in this dementia, meet myself with compassion, and the obvious contemplative practice that it takes to keep doing that and to keep deepening our understanding of what it means to meet ourselves on the road with compassion, how we can best do that, and to keep recommitting ourselves to that day after day. But it also strikes me as very obvious that with that contemplative question of how I can meet myself, my pained self, my ignorant dementia self on the road with compassion, you have to be out on the road. You have to be out on the road meeting people. And that road is so long and so full of so many people who need so much compassion and who might have to be met so many times with compassion before they can find their way home. That road is so full of those people who need us to meet them with compassion that the question of what is at the end of that road or what lies beyond the end of that road just strikes me as so fucking absurd, because our place is on that road with the people who need us there, who need us to bring our contemplative practice to that road. That is our work. That is our home, on the road. And maybe there's something at the end of that road, maybe there's not. But now in this life, our home is on that road for as far as we can see.
So when I think about all of this, and recognize that I am the person that you need to meet on that road with compassion. You are the person that I need to meet on that road with compassion. That we have to be willing to have this deep level of acceptance for ourselves. There's a chapter in the book or section in the book called On Grief, Trauma, and Intimacy, and about how we have to be able to sit with the most wounded aspects of ourselves without poking and prodding and trying to fix. And so how do we sit with the most damaged, unacceptable, burdensome parts of ourselves? And how do we do that in a way that allows us to make peace with our own imperfection? Because when we're seeing one another on the road, we oftentimes are seeing a reflection of our own imperfection. And we're also seeing the capacity for harm reflected back to us in another. And we know that we have that same capacity for harm within us. And so it brings this reaction up inside of us. So when I'm sitting with the parts of myself that I believe are the most unlovable in excruciatingly painful moments, how do I make space for that to just be present in the room? So that we know that there is a place for safety for all aspects of ourselves to exist without amputation. Because we scrub and we scour ourselves bloody in the process. We believe that we have to get rid of and cut off parts of ourselves in order to be lovable. And it's simply untrue. It's simply untrue. So if we can connect with one another in a way that allows us to bring the type of deep compassion that we most need to receive in our own lives to the process of our being in relationship, we won't have to come up with strategy. Because there is going to be this collective exhale from people who have this deep sense of safety in knowing that they are acceptable just as they are, with all of their brokenness and their woundedness and their fallibility. I'm just a girl from the res, right? I don't know anything. And I feel like the first thing that I knew was this realization that I knew nothing. And that was the first time I felt like I knew something in my whole life. I was like, now you're on to something here, right? I mean, I grew up in real poverty, sleeping 4 to 6 to a bed in a room that was barely bigger than a closet. But what I was given was depth of connection to something that was bigger than myself, which I feel is a real gift that I'm very grateful for. And so we all have these different starting places that we come from. And regardless of where we meet each other on that road, regardless of how we present in that moment, there is this innate beauty and purity of our spirit that exists somewhere beyond the bad behavior, somewhere beyond the dementia, somewhere beyond the illusion of separation that has been perpetuated for millennia, that has distorted our thinking and our vision. And that's the place that we need to be not only curious about, but passionate about finding. And I think one of the things that all of the people on this stage have in common is the passion for finding moments within that space. And I hope that you can develop that passion within yourself for searching for that space that exists, not just in here or out there, but also in all the spaces in between. So, Kachiwaliwan, thank you for letting me be here with you, and Basilda Dilabamuk, as always, offering these words for all my relations.
I want to point out to Bob that L. Frank Baum, the author of the wonderful Wizard of Oz, was a theosophist. So he probably would agree with your analysis. I also want to point out that if Auntie M and Uncle Henry had gone out, then no one would have protected the home front. So they all had to play their role in order for the story to work out. And I think that's what we all have to do. I've seen activists burn out and get off track because they try to do too much, or they're trying to conform to somebody's idea of what they're supposed to do, and it's not authentic to them. I've seen contemplative people, yogis, mystics, all kinds of people get into world denial in the name of their own spirituality and their own self-protection. That too can be inauthentic. I've seen a lot of bad, things happen to marriages and careers because of that. So we each need to, yes, have contemplative practice, go within and unfold what's truly authentic and deepest in ourselves. But we also have to have some knowledge of this individuality and what is best for us. What is the right way for us to serve? What feeds us? Activism, service, they don't have to be self-sacrificial. They can nurture us and feed us if we do what's right for us. When I mentioned this morning that the Bhagavad Gita had a big impact on me, and one of the two passages that had the biggest impact was the passage about Dharma. We've all heard Dharma. Dharma is often translated as duty, but it doesn't quite do it. It's acting in a way that serves the highest good for oneself, one's family, one's community. And we all have different roles, and acting in accord with our own dharma in each of those roles is very important for our own spiritual development, but it's also very important for the people around us. It's important for the family to act appropriately according to dharmic principles with one's family. And we're all spiritual citizens. We're all, much as you can say, oh, this is all an illusion and the true self is transcendental and all that. Well, we're still human beings, and we don't, don't want to fall into that trap of denying our humanness. And as humans, we're citizens, and we're called to act in ways that are appropriate for us as individuals, that at least in some ways serves the greater good, serves the larger community. And what that is has to be individual. And as for the question of how to reach all those other people, the fascist and whoever. I hate to say this, but I think some people are just not reachable, and it might be a waste of time to try. I think the best thing is for people who care, like everybody here, to reach the people who are reachable and get them to do more, to act differently. Some people are not going to be reached. They have to be defeated, and they have to be overcome and outnumbered. And that's, the warrior in me saying that. But I think that's the truth. And I think we'd be self-defeating and a bit of a illusion to think we could reach everybody. It just doesn't seem to be working out like that on the battlefield of life at the moment. But to me, it all starts with the discovery of who we really are inside.
I said one very quick thing. One thing, the session that didn't happen, the one about racism and peace, I hope we can somehow work that in here. I think it's so important that we deal with that. Peaches wants to say something back there.
Yeah, we as Robin, the told and as we were whispering and talking in the back seat, I was thinking that one piece that we had on race should not be discarded from this workshop because we're able to teach. It's not fair to me, and it's not fair to anything in this room. Especially when I look around, because I think that everybody for all the people who care about race, race is divided in this world, in this country, and we need to have a conversation about it. If we could distill it somewhere, I would deeply appreciate that. And we have a lot of great minds here on the stage and in this room, and we can carry that conversation well.
Thank you. Yeah. Our facilitator had an emergency and didn't show, so we just had to reshift, and I'm sure we can circle back around. Thank you for presencing that. And thank you all for listening. Bob, do you have an announcement?
Yeah, just on that right after this, there will be a longer session, an hour and a half, on paradigm of racial healing. That will be given by Tim, also in a breakout room. So that is coming right up.
Yeah. Did you hear that?
I did. Because there that everyone is involved.
Yeah, we'll talk about that and regroup. I'm just going to bring this to close for those that are watching this on video, and thank Hubcast, thank Unity Earth TV, thank the Upshift Forum, and those over in Italy who are connecting with us here, and this continued conversation that we plan. I'm wondering if that road, Tim, is the yellow brick road that you were talking about. I don't know if anybody else was wondering that, but I'm singing Munchkin songs in my mind and excited about, presencing that again. Thank you all for your wisdom. Thank you for your compassion, your hearts, your wisdom. And it is an important conversation for us to continue to deepen into and lean into with each other, with that authenticity of us, knowing that we are meeting ourselves on the road, and we are that ant too, and we are those yellow bricks. So we've got that road ahead of us, and I really appreciate all of your words, all of your wisdom, all of your encouragement, all of your truth telling, and we look forward to continuing this for several more hours here tonight and in the morning again. So thank you all.